The New Level Cap podcast is a show about fun, friends, game design, and all things otherwise. Your hosts are Marco DeSantos and Brad Telton of Level 99 Games. I'm Chris Solis, your producer, and without further ado, please enjoy the show.
Judged the podcast. I'm your judge, Marco DeSantos, also known as Mechanic Critic, and with me is my amazing bailiff, co-anchor.
I feel like I'm the judge here, Marco.
That's fair. I'm the defendant.
You should prepare to defend yourself.
All right. I activate my defend trigger, which gives me soak if the internet is between us.
The internet is between us, but they're on my side.
Dang it.
The internet's judging me too.
So the internet's
soak is enough for that.
So the internet's giving you ignore soak and plus power?
Yes. The internet ignores your soak. And it has great power.
Oh no, I'm so sad.
Now we all know that with great power comes great responsibility. The responsibility to revise BattleCON.
Revise BattleCon? Okay, we're gonna head straight into the topic for this week, which is BattleCon rule set changes, or the BattleCon revision. What do we want to call it? What do we want to call this thing?
Let's just call it what we're calling it, which is BattleCon 4. V4.
BattleCon V4. I like it.
V1, Original War, back in 2011, 2012. V2, Devastation in 2014. V3 being Trials in 2016. And now I feel like we're at a point where we are ready to finish. We're gonna try and tie up all of BattleCon. V4, 4th edition BattleCon should be the end-all be-all for this game. And we can make sort of what's the ultimate rule set for BattleCon. And bring everything up to snuff in a way that I don't think we really did with Trials. I think with Trials and with with War Remastered, we, tried to get a lot of things together to fix it up, but we didn't really go all the way with those changes. And this time I want to, because this is the end of BattleCon, I really want to go all the way with it and make it complete.
Yeah.
And make it kind of everything that I had envisioned for it from the beginning.
I see. So we're essentially giving BattleCon its final form. We're turning it into BattleCon Final Version Ultimax HD 2.5 over 72 days, right?
Yeah, sure. With hopefully a few less subtitles. But for the past few weeks, we've been working on balance for BattleCon for a while, but we've been working really heavily on the language, the rulebook, and the
styles,
kind of the conventions. Yeah, I wouldn't say styles, that's a bit overlooked, but the conventions of the game.
I see.
Right? Like, how are we going to express things? How's it going to look? What language are we going to use? There's a lot of stuff that we really just fudged throughout the history of this game, right?
Yeah.
Like, how many words were there for, like, get back a token? Some people said reclaim, some people said regain, some people said recover.
Yeah.
All that.
And then, some of the most classic examples are the difference between switch sides, can't move past, can't move through, like...
Yeah. There's so many things. So, or can't move into. So, we're trying to add some real clarity to all of those effects in the game and catalog them a little bit better. That way, the game will be clearer to players. It'll also be a bit more consistent. And there's various reasons that we're doing that. The last set is one thing that we talked about, but another reason is we are planning to bring BattleCon to other languages. So for all of the future Chinese players of BattleCon and all the future Japanese players of BattleCon, and hopefully for the future European, French, German, Spanish, Italian players of BattleCon, we want to have a rule set that is clear and consistent so that translators can bring it over clearly and consistently.
Yeah, and it's not weird. Like, hopefully through this rule pass, we're able to give every card consistent language and specific wording so that people aren't mistranslating things. Because again, like the word for regain, reclaim, get back, like all of these things could be translated heavily differently and therefore change how they get interpreted, right? And that's a nightmare.
Yeah. And it's not just even the terms. There are some major wording issues in terms of voice. For example, a lot of cards say stun the opponent. Other cards say the opponent becomes stunned. Other cards say inflict stun. Other cards say ignore stun guard. We really want to have, consistent terminology for these things. So
yeah, that's very important. And honestly, with that and the fact that we're releasing Unleashed, which is probably just reprinting how many percent of this game? Like 50% of this game at this point?
Probably. I mean, if we make these major rule changes, probably going to reprint 100% of this game in Unleashed.
Oh, okay. There you go. So
at least to that degree. Like the thing is to update all of the cards in War and Fate and Trials that we weren't going to update anyway. It's like 350 cards.
Uh-huh.
So it's really not huge in the scope of. So Devastation is 700 cards, right? Like the whole game.
Yeah.
That we're reprinting already. And Wonders is, like 150 cards. So it's not as big a deal to reprint all this stuff. And my take on it is that everyone who's interested in the meta is getting Unleashed already. So we don't really have to worry too much about backwards compatibility of it, right? Like people who got War and they loved War, but they didn't feel like they wanted to get any of the other games, then that's good enough for them. They don't really need a patch. They don't really want a patch. And it's okay if we don't patch every copy of War in existence.
Yeah, it's.
But for the people that are playing the tournaments, they are going to want all the cards to be updated to the tournament standard. They're not going to want to be playing first edition or War or third edition War against fourth edition Wanderers.
I guess the question is, would it be available to other people?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we wouldn't do all this work and not make it available.
Right. Okay, so we would be selling them on our store with the updated versions.
Yeah, and if somebody wanted to get those patches, we would make them available, of course.
All right, that's great. And I feel like that's a big reservation a lot of people think about when they hear patches, when they hear, new versions, essentially, and that scares them. Mm-hmm. But it being readily available to non-backers of the Kickstarter is very important, and it's been made very clear. So, Brad, I think we glossed that over. I think we glossed over it a little bit, but can we talk about the specific goals we have in doing this revision, this BattleCon new version? I think it's very clear that we set these goals forward so that our fans can listen and understand why we're making these changes. I feel like a lot of the times when people see changes, they immediately try to analyze the specific change being made and tell us, hey, this change is good, or hey, this change is bad, we shouldn't do this. But at the end of the day, I believe that by making the goal of these changes clear, people will better understand that it's not about whether or not you like the change or not. It's about whether or not these accomplish the goals we've set forth for ourselves, right? And if it doesn't accomplish that, how can we accomplish it, right?
Yeah. To start with that, BattleCon is a game that's pretty heavy. There are a lot of moving parts, and every character brings different moving parts, right? And so for a lot of the game, we really made it up as we went, and that created a lot of situations that were not really fully designed. They were only designed around the idea of one character using this. But eventually, as the game grew, more and more characters used them, and we had to kind of make those rule sets work. And so there were parts of the game that we didn't really formalize. For example, when you inflict things on your opponent, right? So when Kaguya gives you counters, or Alexian gives you chivalry, or Rixen gives you curses, those, or even Dajin gives you wishes, those things aren't really very well thought out, because we know what it means to give something to the opponent, and we know how to play BattleCon, so we can just kind of intuit how that works. But that's not really great design, right?
Yeah.
It creates a lot of corner cases and a lot of weird situations, especially in multiplayer, especially when you play two of these characters that inflict resources against one another. You get into a lot of strange situations. Or even if you have things like Kaguya mirrors, it gets really odd.
Oh gosh. Right? Yeah, for sure.
We want to improve the game to make it good for multiplayer and good for mirror matches and good for all these other weird situations, so that it's fully robust. So that's a primary point.
So would you say that that's clarity? Would you say that that's a point about clarity?
I would say that it's part of clarity. It's like half of clarity.
All right.
Because the other half of clarity is that these cards have a lot of text. And a lot of that text is just redundant, right? Like we have before activated, advance, up to 2 spaces. and then like +2 power if you move past the opponent with this movement.
Okay.
That kind of a phrase. In Exceed, it would be before advance up to 2, +2 power if you advance past the opponent, which is still still a bit wordy, but you can get rid of the word activating, you can get rid of spaces, you can get rid of this beat, you can get rid of a lot of extraneous text, and then the cards start to look very light. And when the cards look light, when they only have 1 or 2 lines of text, then the intention of the card becomes a lot clearer.
Yeah.
And so it's possible to have exhaustive text, and I'm in favor of doing it where it's necessary. But as much as possible, taking words off the cards allows the cards to really stand alone as pure intentions and not as big walls of words.
I mean, I generally agree with that. So we have the point of clarity where we want to make sure that it's easy for people to be able to read or parse the card. So that's the point about, removing extraneous words, coming up with keywords to substitute for long phrases that nobody really cares about, right?
Or things that everybody already knows or that everybody already calls a word. For example, when we move past the opponent with our dodge card and we no longer get hit by them, calling that something.
Yeah.
We could say, you avoid attacks by the opponent.
Yeah.
That makes it a lot clearer, and it lets us do things that interact with the word avoid, like avoid attacks at priority 5+, or this attack can't be avoided, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It gives you more tools for things, and it also makes it clearer because we can define avoid in the rulebook. We could define can't be hit, but hit is already a trigger word. It's already what you do when you're within range of the opponent. It's used in many places. And so I think that's a third point to bring up, is that we're trying to reduce the overusage of single words.
Yeah.
In the game.
Like, if a thing just implies that a thing can't happen to you, you know what I mean? It's like, It's like, rather than calling it stun immunity, which is an aspect that's about your character, you're saying something like, you cannot be stunned, right? Like, they basically mean the same thing, but it's just, like, why did we just put cannot? Like, why can't we just describe that my character is, like, resistant to stun, as opposed to saying, oh, my character cannot be stunned. You know what I mean?
Especially in that sense, we're trying to do more active voice. So you are immune to stuns, as opposed to, you cannot be stunned.
Yeah, there you go.
One of these is active, where I'm immune. The other one is more
passive.
Passive, where it's I can't be affected by a thing. And so we're trying to get more into the active voice. So as opposed to the opponent is stunned, we want to say stun the opponent.
Which makes sense, because a lot of literally every single BattleCon attack is about your character doing a thing. It's not about your character, being done to. You know what I mean?
Well, and also with a lot of these properties, one thing that's a side effect of that is that when you make it more insular, you make it more bound to the characters, it improves the way that multiplayer works. It improves the way that characters interact with each other.
Yes, because they're all just referencing themselves, as opposed to like referencing some random opponent which may or may not exist, which may or may be multiple opponents, or which may or may be different opponents, right?
For example, move 3, you cannot move past the opponent with this movement. That's the kind of line that actually would come up in BattleCon. And that's a bit of a problem because move is used 3 times in that sentence in 3 different ways. There's move, which is the actual advance 3 or retreat 3.
Yep.
There's move past, which is the act of moving your stand-up. And then movement, which is the category of effects that move is included in.
Yeah.
You can see that it's a bit of a snarl, right?
Yeah.
And so, getting rid of the term, move as a trigger keyword, so that the capitalized word move and the lowercase word move are not the same thing.
Yeah.
That will help a lot. And we're working on other things like that. For example, discard is one that we're addressing. We're trying to change the name of the discard piles and the name of the token discard pile, because when we say discard a thing, it's not clear where it goes, because there's 2 piles, and there's your current attack, and there's your
token discard.
Your token discard.
Yeah.
Right. There's too many things called discard. Plus, there's the action of actually discarding, which is called discard.
Yeah.
So this kind of terminology is important to think about for the health of the game.
Yeah, and I think this all boils down to the other point, right? Like I think point 3 is also just part of consistency, right? Because, for example, by having multiple instances of the word move mean different things, we're not consistent with how we use the word move then. You know what I mean? It's like...
Yeah, it's true. It's not consistent. It's a headache, not just for new players, but it's a headache for people who are judging events and such.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure. It's a headache for veterans like me, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not because I don't know how the effect works, right? But it's when we get into those niche situations. This is why I, like, quote and unquote, have this saying, Brad, where I say, oh, I can play Gaspar, just don't expect me to play him correctly. Because at any point in time, I'm not exactly clear about what any of his things do. I mean, I can play him. I can sort of play him in what looks like a correct way, but is that actually the mechanically tournament legal way to play him? I can't tell you, right?
And I think that we could do so much better. And one other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of clarity that we're talking about is that when the game is clearer, new players can play easier, sure. And I think that's important. But like we said, we're making these changes primarily for the veteran players and the future players. So what do they get out of it? Well, when the cards are clearer and more straightforward, it's easier to anticipate your opponent's actions. So the counterplay gets a little bit easier.
Yeah.
If I understand exactly how your triggers and your effects work in as few words possible, then it's a lot easier for me to play around those effects.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is going to make the game a lot smoother and faster for veteran players as well to play at a high level.
We had this talk where I was talking to Daniel, who is a Gaspar main, and I said something along the lines of like, but you have to understand, right, that when you're playing as Gaspar, do you ever get those beats wherein your opponent loses, not because you made the correct read or because your opponent made the incorrect read, but because your opponent didn't know how to parse your effect and accidentally played a bad move into it? And then Daniel...
Yeah, they played around the wrong effect.
Yeah.
Or something to that
or rather,
extent.
like, the way they understood the effect wasn't actually the way the effect's supposed to be resolved, or something along those lines. And then Daniel said, that's happened, and that is the worst feeling. Because even if I win that beat, that's not us playing BattleCon. That's the opponent losing because of language, right?
Yeah. And we really want to reduce those kind of situations. And that's I would say that's the majority of what this change is about. And before we go to our break, I'm going to say one more thing about clarity that we're working on, which is pulling the conditionals of effects into the actual trigger terms so that it's clearer when an effect does or doesn't go off, right? So to explain this, we have some effects that are currently like, trigger, like hit, if such and such and such and such and such and such happened, do this. And we really want to pull those if statements into the trigger so that it's clear whether or not the trigger works just by reading the trigger. So I can read that first line. I can say, hit, the opponent has, 5 inset counters. Okay, well, I don't have that, so I don't have to keep reading anymore. Whereas once you get past that colon in the trigger, you've already kind of committed to reading the whole effect, even if you realize that it's short-circuited.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's another reason to not just improve the clarity and consistency, but also the speed with which you can parse the game and you can resolve your effects. And I think that's going to be a big help too.
I guess it's also more intuitive that way because, like, rather than say, oh, you have this hit effect that does nothing, it's more of like, oh, you have this hit effect, but it doesn't activate. You know what I mean? There's a difference, right? Because currently, if it's like hit if opponent if opponent has blah blah blah, then that hit effect
you still have to do the thing, which is kind of just a nothing.
Yeah,
trigger.
That hit effect, you activate a hit effect that does nothing, as opposed to just not activating a hit effect at all, right?
Yeah,
which is,
and there's a lot of advantages to just not activating it at all if the trigger doesn't matter.
Yeah, and
if it's not going to complete.
Yeah, and for veterans, yes, that means there are certain edge cases where it matters, but I feel like those edge cases are worth changing for the overall clarity.
They'll be improved. Those edge cases will be improved by making things clearer.
Well, no, some edge cases are nerfed because of it, but it's fine. So
anyway, but that's an overview of the kind of changes that we're currently implementing in BattleCon 4th edition.
BattleCon 4th edition, So it's BattleCon, but the A in the battle is replaced with 4. Huh? Huh? All right, so before Brad,
not even Far Cry 4 went that far.
Yeah. I'm going into like movie poster territory because that's where everything needs to go. Because during movies, this is something that doesn't happen in movies, but we're gonna pretend it does. We're gonna take a break in the middle of this podcast so that you can listen to some Level 99 Games news. Brad, is that okay?
Yeah, let's go to the intermission.
All right, intermission for the middle of the movie, go!
Have you signed up for our newsletter? The Level 99 Games newsletter is the best place to keep up with the latest news, events, and releases. Click the link in the description and join today.
Hey everybody, we are back. I am Brad, he is Marco.
Hey.
We are talking BattleCon.
We're talking BattleCon, so we are a talking BattleCon. Yes.
We are talking Battle.
We are talking That's the name of this podcast now, Talking BattleCon, where we talk about BattleCon and BattleCon about talks. Brad,
all right.
Are you ready to word
Marco,
fight?
I'm going to set my talking points.
All right. I set mine as well. Move on to the discussion phase.
All right. Let's reveal who's got priority.
I have a priority of 5. How about you?
All right, you win. Go ahead.
All right, so Brad, we've talked about all of these goals, what we're planning to do in a general overview. For this segment, let's talk more about the benefits. Let's talk more about why these goals are things we want to achieve. We glossed over them a little bit, but again, if we clearly define what are the good things about these changes, hopefully that gives people more of an idea as to why we even want to do these in the first place, right? So we've already talked about the benefits of clarity and the benefits of it's clear what the effects do and it's nicer to read. And okay, so I talked about this during a call in one of our playtesting sessions. The good thing about BattleCon is when you get to that place where you start yomiing and trying to anticipate your opponent's moves, right? The quote-unquote rock, paper, scissors aspect of BattleCon, right?
Yeah.
That's the best and fun part about BattleCon. But to get there, you have to basically read a bunch of card text. And that's not fun, right? To most people, reading a bunch of card text to understand how effects work, that's not fun. The fun part is getting to the rock, paper, scissors thing. So at the end of the day, by doing clarity and doing consistency, we essentially speed track people through the reading part so that they actually get to the fun part of the game, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say that's the pretty accurate point of it. It'll help us get to that high level play faster. Honestly, even for the intermediate players and the experienced players, it'll help your opponents get to that high level play faster, which means that BattleCon is going to be easier for everyone, which means hopefully a larger future player base.
Yeah.
And so even though we say so I think that this is really a point that comes up a lot as we talk about this. We said that Unleashed is going to be the end of BattleCon, right? We're not going to make more fighters after this, but at the same time, we are just releasing it, right? Which means that even though we're done making it, we're going to have to live with it for the next several years. So the things that we're doing right now, we can't do them just to get done. We do them to get it right, to make it as perfect as possible, so that for the next 3 or 4 years or more, we can reap the benefits of having a great game that is fully realized, as opposed to something that we just rushed out because we were obligated to do it.
Yeah. And I guess the finality of it gives us this impetus, right? When we do decide to finally ship it out, there's no more second chances, right?
Well, we won't have to create any more second chances.
Exactly.
Right?
That's the point.
But that said, if we did it perfectly in Wander, if we did it perfectly in Trials, or if we done it perfectly in War Remastered, we also wouldn't have to have a second chance.
Yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately, in those cases, I was a bit too scared of the backwards compatibility issues, and I didn't really think everything through about what the repercussions of doing it or not doing it more completely then. And I think maybe even I wasn't as good of a designer to be able to do it right back then.
We were too young, too dumb to realize,
Yeah. So I think that we've grown a lot since then. me in design and also our team in our skills. And I think that we're in a place where we really can do this right in a way that we haven't been able to do it right before.
Yeah, yeah. And at the end of the day, I guess this is one of the things where, like, somebody said something along the lines of, like, better that the game be delayed and come out great than to get rushed out and be bad. You know what I mean? So...
yeah, I mean, it may cause some delays. We probably won't hit October with this, but I think that that's not the most important issue.
Yeah.
Hitting October, because there's already people want to play BattleCon, can play so much BattleCon, right?
Yeah.
There's not a dark to BattleCon. You can play BattleCon online. So it's really for the people that want Unleashed, want a perfect entire tournament balance collector's edition of BattleCon.
Yep.
And that's what we're going to deliver.
Yes.
And anything less would not be fulfilling our promises.
Yeah, it would be an injustice to the backers. And overall, I think this is the biggest benefit of this entire rules change overhaul thing, is at the end of it all, you, dear listener, dear backer, dear supporter, will just get the product that's just more polished and more nice looking.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about it is that it's not just rule changes, right? It's also templating changes, how the cards look, how the cards are templated. So for example, right now, we're tinkering with, what do we call it, the power and priority bonuses on cards. Not on the stats of the cards itself, but like if an effect says before activating blah 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 power +2, what if that power +2 was red colored? What if that power +2 was italicized to make it more clear and more parsable and more readable? It makes the cards just...
We've been through about like 50 of these templating
oh my
trials.
gosh. Yeah, and
but I think we finally found the one that looks really good.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like, it's not a huge difference, right? It's not like going from, you know, first edition Magic to modern edition Magic cards, right? Where the borders are different, the card arts are different, and everything is different. But when you look at the two cards, they'll look like they're from the same game, but one just looks like it's better, you know? And
it's a little more like, 7th edition to 8th edition, which you can definitely tell there's a shift that happens here, but, you know, it's big enough to recognize, but it's not big enough to make you relearn the game.
Yeah.
In the way that modern versus original would.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And at the end of the day, I feel like that's good and that's great. But Brad, we've been talking up how this is all great and awesome and amazing. Brad, I guess it's time that we finally peel back the curtain a little bit. So we've experienced some bumpy roads. And what are some of those bumpy roads, Brad?
So some of the changes that we do want to make will change the balance. I don't know how heavy some of those changes will be, but like a general shift of getting rid of effects that count on a lot of cards. There's so many cards in the game that are like, you know, +1 power for each whatever up to 3, and setting those at kind of a more reasonable medium number where it's just, you know, +2 power if this, and it's clear cut as opposed to being this scaling effect. We're trying to get rid of a lot of those. And so some of those create balance issues. A lot of players relied on maximizing those scale conditions.
Yeah.
Very few players, I think, cared about the middle ground in the scale conditions. It was really all about maximizing. And so it's very easy to just make those triggers maximized.
Yeah.
But it does create balance issues, and we do have to do a little more testing.
Yeah, for sure.
We could end up making things less clear. And we've been going over a lot of keywords that make sense, but maybe necessarily don't improve the game. And so we're taking a lot of time to discuss each of these changes. And there are a lot of changes that I proposed, which have been cut, which people have convinced me are not healthy for the game, that just create more questions than they answer.
Yeah.
For example, we considered making a word cornered, which means at the edge of the arena. It turns out that it's probably easier to just define what the edge of the arena and what the center of the arena is in the rulebook, as opposed to creating a new word called cornered and then defining that.
I feel like this is a challenge that a lot of people are facing, and I feel like this is good, right? Whenever we propose these changes, there's a lot of discussion that happens, and ultimately, I feel like the most fruitful discussions are the things where something gets proposed, people
have a real thoughtful discussion about it.
Yeah, for the lack of a better term, argue about it, right? Or discuss about it for a bit, and then we end up with something that doesn't look anything usually remotely like what was originally proposed, but is actually just better than what was originally proposed.
It generates consensus.
Yeah,
and I think those really are the best discussions, where we come up with something and we ultimately sell the player base on it, or they sell us on their idea, or we
compromise.
We agree to we come up with a compromise, or we're just dissuaded because we can see the advantages of the old way. And I think we've even had a lot of discussions where fans have proposed something secondary to our proposal, and that's ended up being the better way.
Yeah,
and we've gone with that. So the discussions have been really great.
Yeah, the discussions have been very heated, but also very respectful, and I guess that's what
it feels good.
Yeah, it feels good.
It feels really good.
It's been very very respectful, and at least when we're not memeing on each other about rules, I guess. But at the end of the day, we have fun. It's a fun discussion, right? Like one would feel weird if I said that there is a point in time wherein some place on the internet has a bunch of people arguing about stuff, and it's fun to do so. But for BattleCon and playtesting BattleCon, it has been fun to do so.
It has. I think it's really. I think it's been a great time, and it's been really close to. It's been a way to get closer to the community, which I really appreciate. Sometimes I jump in and there's not a lot to say, except I'm glad you guys are liking the game. So it's really neat to now be working with those players on the future of the game.
Yeah. Okay, Brad. Brad, we're about to end the podcast, so let's talk about some of the changes that we've essentially vetted.
Some specific examples to give a good idea.
Yeah. So we've given lots of examples of things that we're planning on doing or might be doing, and we've given lots of examples of things that we know we're not doing because they're bad, or rather we've been convinced that they're not worth the amount of effort or time to dedicate to that. But now let's talk about stuff that we have decided, hey, this is probably good and worth our effort. Mind if I start?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so we now have a new keyword, or a new quote-unquote form of movement, which is teleport. So this is essentially a replacement for the phrase move directly, which appears on a number of cards, so including stuff like, Clin Hyde's cards, or Heketch's unique ability. Like, that's a big example, right?
Kadath was the very first user of this term. But a lot of characters move directly in some way. And just using teleport is thematically a lot clearer, right? It tells you, hey, you pick up your stand-up out of the space, you put it in this other space. You don't cross anything in between.
Yeah.
So that's clear.
And
it's also defined in terms of advance and retreat.
Yeah.
Which is a big thing, because move directly was never defined in that way.
So, and that was a big deal, right? Because move directly, again, this was a problem with the overloading of the word move, right? But move directly was not actually a advance or retreat directly. It was actually an entirely different kind of movement that wasn't affected by effects that were advance or retreat, which is
affected by effects. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. But yes, that's. I don't know how else to say that, right?
No, it's true. It's true. Just proving the point, right?
Yeah.
That's correct. That so now we have a teleport, which is a formalized word that means advance or retreat in the way specified without entering or leaving any of the other spaces in between. And so, and a corollary to that, enter and retreat are standard language. Yeah. And I would say there's a difference between keyword and standard language. We've always had triggers that say enter and leave, but now we're standardizing it, so we're going to say enter and leave spaces as opposed to move out of or move into or those sorts of things.
This is just part of consistency, right?
We may have new language, but not all that new language is keywords. A lot of it is just picking one of the many terms we've used over the years and sticking consistently with that term.
This is it. This is the correct one.
Another example that we're working on is we are formalizing triggers for when you get hit. So as opposed to saying, when the opponent hits you after all on-hit effects, do this thing, we'll just have a trigger that is at this time, like when you get hit, do this thing. And we're still working on the wording for that trigger. We're thinking maybe resist or defend or endure or something like that.
Intercept,
we don't want to
react,
use get.
Right?
Intercept, maybe, yeah. React. We don't want to use get hit because hit is already a trigger. And we want to make sure that our triggers look different on paper than different word forms.
Yeah.
But that's another example. One trigger that we are putting in is a setup trigger. So we're formalizing the setup steps that happen on characters' unique abilities. So instead of reading the kind of almost prose text that says, so-and-so has 5 counters and starts with 3 of them, and this is how they work, we say, we give a quick explanation of the ability, and then we say, setup, put X triggers in your supply, put triggers in your depletion pile, tokens, and that makes it really clear that the exact steps for the setup and also the timing of setup steps, which may be discrete. For example, like if you're playing Joel versus, say, Enderbit, you have this setup step where you build your hands. And when does that actually happen and who gets to see what? We can now describe all of those steps in the rulebook so that it's not ambiguous to players how it works.
It's simultaneous, right? So now you know.
Right.
Now you know.
And now it's official.
Yeah, now it's official, right? Because before it was just like, oh, as a BattleCon player, I've played enough games and I read this rules text, so I know what this means and implies that. But now it's just like the game goes, no, this is how you do it, dummy, right? This is how it is. This is just how it works. This is the timing. Do it here. You don't need to have 500 games of experience to intuit that from this 2-sentence paragraph or whatever that I've written down. You just know because there's a timing trigger for it now. And I feel like that's very useful and very good. Can I mention one more thing?
Yeah, go for it.
So we've also introduced, introduced keywords and or consistent language. This is probably more of a keyword thing, but now essentially characters are getting their own keywords because a lot of characters tend to have, like, especially characters with lots of components or characters who give people components. So say again, maybe Rin from Wanderers who can give people frost counters, or maybe even Ajenna from Devastation who can give people petrification counters, right? Like, a lot of their effects...
Or even just characters with a special unique state. For example, a character like Phelana has a lot of effects that say, if the opponent's attack pair includes a base, which is also a copy of that base is in your GS pile. Like, that whole phrase, we can compress into a single word that's unique to that character.
Yes.
And then we can tell you what that means during the setup. Like, you have conviction if a player has a base, if the other player has a base, which has the same name as the copy of your base in the GS pile. And then we can just say, hit, conviction, do this thing.
Yeah.
And it's much clearer than having to write that same phrase out
every time that effect pops up, right?
And it also helps with consistency because if, for example, we have a couple characters that have two very similar phrases, but they're different. Like, it might say, if you have insects in one discard pile versus if you have insects in 2 discard piles. And condensing that helps it to be a lot clearer if I have infest 1 or infest 2, which triggers get to go off and which ones don't, as opposed to me having to go through those 3 sentences of text and figure out where the number is.
Yeah, and I think that's very, very good. And, this is a thing that, like, essentially Magic does, right? Like, when they introduce keywords that are like that. But I feel like for our game, it's even better because characters are self-contained things, right? So, like, we have the advantage because we can print it right there on their UA card what the keyword is.
Yeah. And the reference is already baked in.
Exactly. And so, therefore, we can use that keyword on the character so many times as possible. And there's literally no excuse for people going, oh, but I don't know what the keyword is, or the keyword's hard to find what it means, because literally it's part of the character's setup card, and you can't play the game without seeing that setup card, right? So by default, you always have that reference, and the reference is not even in the rule book, which means it's like even more easy to access than any of the other actual keywords in the game, like say, I don't know, teleport, right? Teleport doesn't have an exact keyword reference that is available on the board all the time. But something like conviction or something like, I don't know what the agenda thing would be called. Maybe like petrified or stoned or rocked. I don't know.
But there's also, and we also have a little bit more room. So we've updated the reference cards for the characters. The reference card template, the new one is super nice. And that also gives us a lot of room to play with.
Oh, yeah.
So it's, because, the new reference cards, you actually get 2 reference cards per character. One has their styles and finishers. The other one has the standard bases on one side and the unique base on the other side. And so you can actually take these 2 cards from my opponent and I can pair them up and see how my opponent's attacks line up on any given moment. And
you can create
there's a lot of
fake attack pairs from your opponent's hand.
Yeah, so it's a lot more like BCO in that I can really just shuffle through my opponent's hand really quickly with these reference cards and see and compare their attacks to mine.
That's cool.
I think that'll make a big difference as well. But that gives us a lot of room to write out, triggers that a character uses, and maybe even some of the less common triggers in the game.
Like, say, teleport, I guess, right? or something like that.
Teleport, or if we have, if we end up going with the keyword for counterattacks, that goes into the triggers, we can explain what that means.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. But we're not sure about counterattacks yet. Counterattacks, by the way, for people who don't know what that might mean, is the trigger that says, when you take damage, do a thing. So like when Eligor gains its vengeance, for example.
Well, anyway, there's a lot of things. It's a happening time for BattleCon. There's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of things that we're working on improving for the game.
Brad,
and
you know what that means?
Yeah.
If they want to be part of the discussion, and if they want to see what's happening with BattleCon, they should.
You beat me to it, Marco. They should come and join the discussion on the official server in Discord. And if you become a playtester, we're talking just about every Monday and every Wednesday about the potential changes that we're going through, and we're getting your feedback to make the game better. So I hope that you come join us and be a part of that discussion.
Yes, and you know what? I'm saying it right now, because it's a BattleCon week. On Friday, I'll also be streaming. So if you wanted to chat with me or just see some of the card changes that we've done, because we do have drafts for the card changes, right? So that you can see for yourself firsthand how the new cards stack up to the old cards and how much better they look and how much clearer the wording can be. And maybe like this audio hasn't sold you on it, but maybe when you see the cards, maybe then you'll understand. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the New Level Cap podcast. I'm really glad that you were here with us, all of my friends. If you liked it, share it with a friend. And if you hated, share it with an enemy. As usual, it has been me, your host, Marco DeSantos, also known as your character style. And with me has been your character base and my co-host,
Brad Talton. And I am happy to have been here with you as well. And I hope that you're all looking forward to the new edition of BattleCon as much as I am.
Oh, Brad, I am. I very much am. So, without much else to say,
happy gaming, and don't forget your force style.
Don't forget your force style. Oh my gosh, you just threw that one out. Yes, force special action is now a style. And thank you, World of Indians. Thank you, and good night.
The New Level Cap podcast is produced by Level 99 Games. Join us next Wednesday for more design talk and shenanigans. Thank you for listening.